Chapter 4 of the Return of Dr. Fu-Manchu. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Elaine Tweddle. The Return of Dr. Fu-Manchu by Sax Rohmer. Chapter 4 The Cry of a Nighthawk. Such were the episodes that marked the coming of Dr. Fu-Manchu to London, that awakened fears long dormant and reopened old wounds, nay, poured poison into them. I strove desperately by close attention to my professional duties to banish the very memory of Karamaneh from my mind. Desperately, but how vainly! Peace was for me no more, joy was gone from the world, and only mockery remained as my portion. Poor Eltham we had placed in a nursing establishment, where his indescribable hurts could be properly tended, and his uncomplaining fortitude not infrequently made me thoroughly ashamed of myself. Needless to say, Smith had made such other arrangements as were necessary to safeguard the injured man, and these proved so successful that the malignant being whose plans they thwarted abandoned his designs upon the heroic clergyman, and directed his attention elsewhere, as I must now proceed to relate. Dusk always brought with it a cloud of apprehensions, for darkness must ever be the ally of crime, and it was one night, long after the clocks had struck the mystic hour "when churchyards yawn," that the hand of Dr. Fu-Manchu again stretched out to grasp a victim. I was dismissing a chance patient. "Good night, Dr. Petrie," he said. "Good night, Mr. Forsyth," I replied, and having conducted my late night visitor to the door, I closed and bolted it, switched off the light, and went upstairs. My patient was chief officer of one of the P&O boats. He had cut his hand rather badly on the homeward run, and signs of poisoning having developed, had called to have the wound treated, apologizing for troubling me at so late an hour, but explaining that he had only just come from the docks. The hall clock announced the hour of 1 as I ascended the stairs. I found myself wondering what there was in Mr. Forsyth's appearance which excited some vague and elusive memory. Coming to the top floor, I opened the door of a front bedroom, and was surprised to find the interior in darkness. "Smith!" I called. "Come here and watch," was the terse response. Nayland Smith was sitting in the dark at the open window and peering out across the common. Even as I saw him, a dim silhouette, I could detect the tensity in his attitude which told of high-strung nerves. I joined him. "What is it?" I said curiously. "I don't know. Watch that clump of elms." His masterful voice had the dry tone in it betokening excitement. I leaned on the ledge beside him and looked out. The blaze of stars almost compensated for the absence of the moon, and the night had a quality of stillness that made for awe. This was a tropical summer, and the common, with its dancing lights dotted irregularly about, had an unfamiliar look to-night. The clump of 9 elms showed as a dense and irregular mass, lacking detail. Such moods as that which now claimed my friend are magnetic. I had no thought of the night's beauty, for it only served to remind me that somewhere amid London's millions was lurking an uncanny being, whose life was a mystery, whose very existence was a scientific miracle. "Where's your patient?" rapped Smith. His abrupt query diverted my thoughts into a new channel. No footstep disturbed the silence of the highroad. Where was my patient? I craned from the window. Smith grabbed my arm. "Don't lean out," he said. I drew back, glancing at him surprisedly. "For heaven's sake, why not?" "I'll tell you presently, Petrie. Did you see him?" "I did, and I can't make out what he is doing. He seems to have remained standing at the gate for some reason." "He has seen it," snapped Smith. "Watch those elms." His hand remained upon my arm, gripping it nervously. Shall I say that I was surprised? I can say it with truth. But I shall add that I was thrilled, eerily, for this subdued excitement and alert watching of Smith could only mean one thing: Fu-Manchu. And that was enough to set me watching as keenly as he, to set me listening, not only for sounds outside the house, but for sounds within. Doubts, suspicions, dreads heaped themselves upon my mind. Why was Forsyth standing there at the gate? I had never seen him before, to my knowledge, yet there was something oddly reminiscent about the man. Could it be that his visit formed part of a plot? Yet his wound had been genuine enough. Thus my mind worked, feverishly. Such was the effect of an unspoken thought. Fu-Manchu. Nayland Smith's grip tightened on my arm. "There it is again, Petrie!" he whispered. "Look! Look!" His words were wholly unnecessary. I too had seen it. A wonderful and uncanny sight. Out of the darkness under the elms, low down upon the ground, grew a vaporous blue light. It flared up, elfinish, then began to ascend. Like an igneous phantom, a witch flame, it rose, high, higher, higher, to what I judged to be some 12 feet or more from the ground. Then high in the air it died away again as it had come. "For God's sake, Smith, what is it?" "Don't ask me, Petrie. I've seen it twice. He paused. Rapid footsteps sounded below. Over Smith's shoulder I saw Forsyth cross the road, climb the low rail, and set out across the common. Smith sprang impetuously to his feet. "We must stop him!" he said hoarsely. Then clapping a hand to my mouth as I was about to call out, "Not a sound, Petrie!" He ran out of the room and went blundering downstairs in the dark, crying, "Out through the garden! The side entrance!" I overtook him as he threw wide the door of my dispensing room. Through it he ran and opened the door at the other end. I followed him out, closing it behind me. The smell from some tobacco plants in a neighboring flower bed was faintly perceptible. No breeze stirred, and in the great silence I could hear Smith in front of me tugging at the bolt of the gate. Then he had it open, and I stepped out, close on his heels, and left the door ajar. "We must not appear to have come from your house," explained Smith rapidly. "I will go along the high road and cross to the common 100 yards up, where there is a pathway, as though homeward bound to the north side. Give me half a minute's start, then you proceed in an opposite direction and cross from the corner of the next road. Directly you are out of sight of the street lamps, get over the rails and run for the elms." He thrust a pistol into my hand and was off. While he had been with me, speaking in that incisive, impetuous way of his, with his dark face close to mine and his eyes gleaming like steel, I had been at one with him in his feverish mood; but now, when I stood alone in that staid and respectable byway, holding a loaded pistol in my hand, the whole thing became utterly unreal. It was in an odd frame of mind that I walked to the next corner as directed, for I was thinking, not of Dr. Fu-Manchu, the great and evil man who dreamed of Europe and America under Chinese rule; not of Nayland Smith, who alone stood between the Chinaman and the realization of his monstrous schemes; not even of Karamaneh, the slave girl, whose glorious beauty was a weapon of might in Dr. Fu-Manchu's hand, but of what impression I must have made upon a patient had I encountered one then. Such were my ideas up to the moment that I crossed to the common and vaulted into the field on my right. As I began to run towards the elms, I found myself wondering what it was all about, and for what were we come. 50 yards west of the trees it occurred to me that if Smith had counted on cutting Forsyth off we were too late, for it appeared to me that he must already be in the coppice. I was right. 20 paces more I ran, and ahead of me from the elms came a sound. Clearly it came through the still air, the eerie hoot of a nighthawk. I could not recall ever to have heard the cry of that bird on the common before, but oddly enough I attached little significance to it until, in the ensuing instant, a most dreadful scream, a scream in which fear and loathing and anger were hideously blended, thrilled me with horror. After that I have no recollection of anything until I found myself standing by the southernmost elm. "Smith!" I cried breathlessly. "Smith! My God, where are you?" As if in answer to my cry came an indescribable sound, a mingled sobbing and choking. Out from the shadows staggered a ghastly figure, that of a man whose face appeared to be streaked. His eyes glared at me madly, and he mowed the air with his hands like one blind and insane with fear. I started back. Words died upon my tongue. The figure reeled and the man fell babbling and sobbing at my very feet. Inert I stood, looking down at him. He writhed a moment and was still. The silence again became perfect. Then, from somewhere beyond the elms, Nayland Smith appeared. I did not move. Even when he stood beside me, I merely stared at him fatuously. "I let him walk to his death, Petrie," I heard dimly. "God forgive me!" God forgive me!" The words aroused me. "Smith!" My voice came as a whisper. "For one awful moment I thought..." "So did someone else," he rapped. "Our poor sailor has met the end designed for me, Petrie!" At that I realized two things. I knew why Forsyth's face had struck me as being familiar in some puzzling way, and I knew why Forsyth now lay dead upon the grass. Save that he was a fair man and wore a slight mustache, he was, in features and build, the double of Nayland Smith. End of Chapter 4. Recording by Elaine Tweddle, Stirling, Ontario.